Welcome, everybody. Welcome to the Wired for Growth podcast. My name is Michael Pahl. I'm the founder and president of Winona IT. Today, I've got Scott Nieveen with us. He's our director of company culture. I've got Chad Hummel as our guest speaker today. Chad, thanks for coming back. Appreciate it.
Happy to be here.
Thank you so much for tuning into this podcast. We're here to do topics on life, tech, and business. And today, we're doing a topic that I'm really passionate about. First 90 days on the job, how to be successful in your first 90 days. But I also want to clarify that I think a lot of what we're going to talk about today is really relevant for anybody in the workplace, whether you're kind of hitting the restart button on your job or it is truly your first 90 days. I think a lot of topics we're going to talk about today really translate well to several different scenarios.
Yeah, absolutely.
So one of the things I really want to talk about today is just master the basics. Whether you're new at the job, been there for a little while, again, and you're maybe you're hitting the reset button, just understand the job and what's being asked of you. Seems like a really good place to start. What are a couple of ways, Chad, that people can just understand what's being asked of them?
Yeah, I think it's really important to understand what your job description describes. And let me even back up. From an employer perspective, it's really important that you tell prospective employees or those new employees what their job is, right? Yeah. And so if the employer has done that really well and put an accurate job description together, it's really important to make sure that you understand in full depth what the job is so that you can prepare as you're walking in the door for that first day, in that first 90 days, what you need to be asking questions about, what is most important, and they're telling you how to succeed, but how you are going to operate over the course of your employment with the business.
Now, employers that don't have clear job descriptions, what are they risking by kind of skipping out on that?
Showing that it's important that that individual is employed with them, right? If I don't take the time as an employer to describe to you accurately what your job is, I'm really doing you a disservice. And in the end, you're not going to be successful with us because my expectations are going to be vastly different than what you have perceived the job to be.
And probably changing all the time too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think the other thing, it creates a pitfall right away in probable lack of alignment with the team you're putting them on, the role you've asked them to be in, because we all know human nature is you gravitate towards the things you like to do.
Absolutely.
Not always the things you're asked to do.
Absolutely. Now, we've had a couple of situations at Winona IT where we've asked something of somebody in their job description. We've had to reference that down the line when maybe that expectation wasn't being met. We're not recommending this be something that's held over people's heads. We're just recommending that understanding the job, the details, the requirements, it's just a really good step one.
Yeah, and I think even describing kind of the progression to it. I mean, even if you're a seasoned person coming into a role, there's a certain amount of learning curve that you've got, whether it's, domain knowledge with a client, could be how our processes work, but to be able to walk through that job description and just say, hey, here's some of the things we're going to train you in first and expose you to, and then these are some things that are going to come along later.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. I think there is some room on a job description for tangible responsibilities, but we don't want it to all just be the tangible things, the day-to-day, this is what you're going to do from step one to step two, or to the very end of the process, right? Leaving it open to not only give them some creative ability in their position, but I need to make sure that what I'm asking you to do overarchingly is what needs to be done for the position.
Yeah, it makes total sense. Well, another step, I think, hey, how can you be successful in your first 90 days? Another step is day one, show up early.
Yeah, absolutely.
How many times, you're really establishing that first impression in the interview process, but then you really have a second first impression, and it's your first day at work. Show up early. It seems simple, but these kinds of things matter, don't they?
Yeah, and I think what is even more important is before that, ask how you can be prepared, right?
Sure. Yep.
Because from an employer perspective, I know that I'm guilty of in the past not giving all the details because it's second nature to me,
right.
Sure.
But it's important to them because they have never been here before, right? From an employee perspective. So don't be afraid to ask the questions of how you can be prepared for your first day.
That's really related to kind of step 3 I was going to talk about, which is be proactive. When we have an employee that comes through the door and they're very proactive, they're not just waiting to be told what to do. They're out there discovering, initiating relationships. I mean, those people are successful in the long term. It's an immediate fork in the road, if you would. Talk to us a little bit about this, Scott.
Yeah, I think, for sure communication is such a critical piece. I think understand with your manager early, like, hey, how do you like to be communicated with? When these kind of regular situations happen, how would you prefer that I respond? I mean, to take the initiative to have that as opposed to dole it out in like bite-sized chunks is such a nice thing for a manager to have somebody show up that way.
Yeah. Now, Chad, here's a difficult question. So I know every industry is different. Every employer is different. There's certain personalities that really don't lend themselves to thinking a little bit outside the box. There's certain personalities that or folks rather that are really good at executing their to-do lists, if you would. How would you coach somebody that doesn't have this natural tendency to be proactive and to think about things just a little bit differently as they kick off a new job or a new career?
I think it comes down to, Scott, you just said it, communicating, right? And at the end of the day, the job getting done is a requirement of the employer to make sure that we're holding that person accountable to doing the job, right? I think that employers need to be better about communicating what those expectations are. And folks that are very linear and they're here to do a job and these are the steps to get it done and this is how I know how to do it. It's the employer's job to try to coach them into that and help them to understand, hey, this is where I'd love for you to use a little bit of that creative juice and where you have the autonomy to say, hey, if you could scrap this whole process, what would you do, right? So encouraging and helping them understand that's an okay thing for you to do. You don't have to be super linear in your roles and responsibilities.
Yeah.
Now with Winona IT being a startup, something that I've struggled with is you want to give people guardrails when they join your organization. You want to give them clarity, but you don't have everything figured out. And I think that's where this kind of proactive approach can really be helpful. Part of this is, what are problems that haven't been solved that I can solve? What has not yet been figured out that I can bring clarity to? Now, the big part of that is communication, which you just said. What are some other ways that people can really help the whole system when they join and kind of rise to the top?
I think it's really first identifying what the problem is and understanding it. And then before going to supervisor and just, parroting off this problem, it's actually thinking of, hey, here's 3 potential solutions or paths we can start going down, and then bring those potential solutions to your manager.
Absolutely.
And I know that we're going down the path and we want to encourage people to be a little bit autonomous and to have this proactive nature. Not everyone is that way.
Right.
And I think as an employer, we have to be okay in saying, hey, I've got some really good Indians that they just want to be Indians, right? Because I know how to utilize that. And then those top performers, those high performers are going to rise and move to the top with doing some of the proactive things that you're doing. But not everyone is going to be that way. And it is okay, right?
Yeah. No, definitely.
And I can think of, some younger people that we've hired in, the last year and a half or so. Early on, they needed a lot of those kind of marching order kinds of things. And it's neat to see their maturity and growth that now they are able to operate a little more autonomously.
Definitely. If it doesn't come naturally, perhaps this is something that can be coached over time.
And I think it naturally comes with confidence, right? Once they're in the role, they understand what they're doing. They know exactly how to operate. Then they can start to think outside the box and say, wait, why are we doing it this way? Let me come up with this idea and really be proactive and present a different way of thinking about this, but because I'm confident in what I'm doing.
I want to overemphasize this point again. I know I've said it a few times, but I really want these points to be true, not only for those that are starting a new job or starting a new career, but people who maybe they're a little bit stuck at work. Maybe it's time to hit the reset button. Maybe they just need a little bit of encouragement. This 4th point, I think, really applies to everybody, but it's seeking out feedback. You can really differentiate yourself in the workplace if you're somebody who consistently seeks out feedback. And, Scott, I can tell you 1 or 2 really crystal clear examples where we hired somebody new, and at that 30, 60-day mark, they're saying, what can I do different? How can I change my approach? What can I focus on? And man, as an employer, I respect that a whole lot. It's a differentiating factor for a lot of people we bring in. how can people solicit feedback? How can they have these candid conversations in the workplace?
You can't be afraid to ask, right? Being humble in the process is really important, and those are types of people that we want, but you can't be afraid to ask. The other thing that I would say is not from the employee perspective, but let's do a good job from an employer perspective of creating that type of environment.
Right.
What you've done at Winona IT in hiring Scott to be your director of company culture, this is part of what he is supposed to be doing with your employees, is engaging with them, building that relationship. So just naturally, those conversations start to happen. And then you can encourage people to say, hey, you know what, maybe you should go talk to this individual or that individual based upon the needs. I think creating an environment from an employer perspective where we want those things to just naturally come about, I think is huge.
Yeah, and I think just positively reinforcing those people that ask that question is one way to help solidify this as a component of the culture we're really looking for. Chad, I know you've coached us a lot on, hey, look, you got to have 30-day reviews, you got to have 90-day reviews, and I think maybe for a lot of people out there, it's, oh, do I have to? But this is a really good opportunity to have these types of conversations.
Absolutely. Even if you don't have a Scott, right, it's really important to keep communicating with your folks.
Yeah.
Keep that open line of communication, not only what you want to say, but giving them an opportunity to provide that feedback. And if you're not having those regular conversations, then you might have people that are spiraling in the job and you don't have any idea. And then you've got a turnover issue. Yeah. Then you've got a hiring issue. Yeah. And then you've got an overall retention issue because it just spirals from there, right? And so I think it's really important that we continue those conversations.
I think the other thing that really helps, Chad, is alignment. If you've already, started to get off tangent a little bit in 30 days, man, it's not that far to bring it back as opposed to waiting to their annual review. And they're way off.
Well, and what's the cost to the company of having somebody who's not a fit, not enjoying their work, it's just not working out? What's the cost of having them for 12 months versus 30 days?
Right.
It's astronomical.
Turnover isn't always bad, right? Especially when it's not a good fit for the business or for that individual. And most times it's both on both sides.
Yeah.
And if you're able to curve some of those issues on the front hand, maybe you save them, but also you're saving yourself a whole lot of time and effort on the backside.
Totally makes sense. Now, I bet there's some folks out there that are saying, hey, I've worked here for 25 years. I've worked here for 30 years. Or maybe they're saying, hey, my manager is really tough on me. And they're hesitant to ask, what can I do better? How can I do better? Or I suppose also if you're just there for 30 days, that could be an intimidating question as well. Can people email their supervisor this kind of question? I mean, how can people who, man, this is a daunting thing, how can they overcome that?
Again, you can't be afraid to ask, right? Is there a wrong way to ask? Maybe there's a wrong time to ask, but I think it's important to get with your manager, your supervisor, whoever it is, get them isolated in a way that you can have a real conversation with them. But you can't be afraid to ask. If you want the feedback, you can't be afraid to ask for it.
Chad, I think, and you kind of touched on it briefly, but I really think the manager being transparent and vulnerable with their own growth or shortcomings, that's what also sets up that environment. Like, it's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to not have this mastered. That's what we're here about. And to tap into our value of always learn and continuously improve, I mean, that's the core of it.
Yeah, another way to say what you're saying is, why don't you ask your direct reports? How can you improve? How can you get better? And role modeling that, it's going to have a trickle-down effect.
Absolutely.
And again, we're talking about a perfect world, right?
Sure.
Because there's a lot of really bad managers and leaders.
Yeah, absolutely.
I won't even say leaders, but managers out there, right? Yeah. And so if you're somebody that's seeking that feedback and you can't get it from that individual, seek out who is going to be able to speak into you, right?
Yeah.
And try to help describe what's important to you and what you're looking for, and try to get some of that feedback from somebody else, maybe not from your direct manager.
Now, if I heard you correctly, I mean, maybe even that's somebody outside of work even that just understands how you tick and
absolutely, because
how you work.
Most times it's not about the tangible things we're doing day in and day out. It's not about how we're building that widget or what software process we've completed for the day. It's more about those softer skill types of things that people are going to be able to speak to from a personal perspective, not just a career perspective.
I think another thing that comes to mind, Michael, is that if we know there's an area that we're trying to grow in or maybe is weaker for us, and you think about, anticipate the next environment where you get an opportunity to live in that. Somebody else that's in the room up here in your team, you could easily say, hey, Michael, we're going to be in this interview together. Why don't you kind of watch how I interact with them? And I'd like to hear some feedback from you at the end of the interview, how I did on that.
Oh, it makes sense.
Yep.
All right, Scott, this is your area of expertise. So my next point.
No pressure.
no pressure at all. My next point is you can be successful if you adapt to the culture.
Yep.
Talk us through that a little bit. What are practical, what does that mean?
Yeah. They say one of the biggest indicators of somebody being successful in a new environment really is their level of self-awareness. Mm-hmm. And we can grow in that level of self-awareness, but we tend to be where we're at. And so I would say for maybe people that struggle in that area a little bit, I think it's really trying to pay attention to how are people interacting, how does the workflow process, who are the decision makers, and really just understanding the environment before you just kind of put your head down and just start trying to accomplish your job. And the key of it is ask questions. I mean, it never hurts to upfront, and I do this in my initial onboarding. You may ask the question one time, two times, and then you feel embarrassed to ask it a third time. I would rather have somebody ask it the third time because they aren't sure what to do than, just move forward. And so I think for people to be able to recognize what the environment's like and then adjust to that is huge.
Now, it takes a certain level of awareness, right?
Yes.
But I think even more so than that, it's just somebody being intentional about this to a large degree.
If I can make a point on that, from an individual that's walking into an environment where it was exactly the same thing that they're coming from, right? And what you're saying without saying it is, your way isn't always the best.
Right.
The way it was done at your previous employer may not be the best way for this company or just in general. So you have to come in and get the lay of the land, understand the culture, understand the business, understand what the needs are, especially from a leader perspective. Walking in, being a new leader in a business, you absolutely have to assimilate to the business that you're walking into. Yeah. That is so important to get credibility.
We struggle with folks that we bring in from, let's just use med device as just one example, where there's a lot of process, procedure, even red tape, and rightfully so, right? This is knees and hips and really important things being produced. But I'm really proud to say that the people we've brought in, although there have been bumps at the beginning because we're a startup and don't have everything figured out, people have adapted really, really well, see the advantages of being agile. Scott, what are some of the conversations you've had with folks that at first there was a blip in adapting, but we've been able to walk people through the process?
Yeah, I think it's stepping back and really trying to help people see kind of the end goal or the path we're headed down and help them, to Chad's point earlier, help them see that, hey, there's different ways to get at this. And even though you're used to this model or this method, this is the way we're choosing to do it. We're still refining it. But for you to be able to settle in and understand how we're accomplishing things is really helpful.
Yeah. Conversely, it's really important for our employers to be cognizant of the fact that there may be some strong skills that are coming from that individual. And I don't want to extinguish who they are by telling them that the way that they think and the way that they operate is not how we do things here.
Super glad you brought that up. That's, we've really tried to be intentional about not extinguishing that. In fact, saying, how can you adapt to our culture, yet us leverage that skill within you? It's going to look different. It might smell different, but we still want to play to the strengths.
Absolutely.
And it opens our eyes to a world that we haven't seen before.
Absolutely.
So, Chad, one of the points I think people don't really get a lot of instruction on, and I think it really makes a big difference, is what's referred to often as managing up. It's aligning yourself to your manager, understanding their goals, their objectives, and coming alongside of them and helping them push forward. What are some practical ways that people can do this?
Communicate. We've said it so many times, and I say it all the time in the business I'm in. You got to communicate, right? Ask questions. Be hungry to learn about what's going on in your manager's world, what the expectations are for your manager, how that trickles down to you, but continue to ask questions and to continue to be hungry for that knowledge.
That's great.
Yeah, I think it's very similar. I think it's really understanding what your manager is passionate about, what causes them pain or stress, and figuring out, okay, what role can I play and kind of alleviating that and kind of working through problems. If you're able to do that, people are always going to find a place for you.
Oh, imagine if you joined a role and you were able, through good communication and regular communication, which is really important, find a huge pain point in your manager's life that you can alleviate. I mean, you're setting yourself up to be very successful.
So many times as leaders and managers and organizations, it can be a really lonely place, right? Yeah. And when you know that you have a team who's engaged in you and is working with you and for the business, not to be, focused on myself in that process, but when you know that a team is following you and they're engaged in the process, that's so rewarding for me and so motivating for me.
This next one is a big deal. And we talked about it on previous podcasts. Build relationships. One of our core values is build meaningful relationships. And what we talk about with that, Chad, is not just my peers, but my clients and vendors as well. And building relationships buys you a lot of grace. There's no other way to do it. You have to build relationships to be successful in the workplace. What are a couple other advantages that focusing on relationships, especially maybe your first 90 days, what else comes with that?
I would throw in genuine relationships, right? Yeah. Because there's a difference between I'm just trying to butter you up versus I truly am interested in
Chad, how's the family?
And then you just walk away,
exactly.
Right? I mean, it can come across really disingenuous.
Yeah, meaningful and genuine. That's good.
Yep. It again shows that you're engaged in the business, whether it's your fellow coworkers and that you're there to support them, or your leaders in the business, that you're engaged and want to learn about the business and do well for the business. But it's how you gain credibility. They learn about you, they learn what you're there for, and then vice versa, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think just starting off and in your first 90 days, focusing on one or two genuine, meaningful relationships you can establish is going to open your eyes to a deeper level of what's going on in the organization and what you can focus on than whether or not you're just email and surface level. Really makes a big difference.
Michael, this whole thing of relationships is huge. And one of the stats that's out there is that people that have a good friend at the place that they work are 86% more likely to stay.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
It's huge.
Yeah. In The First 90 Days by Watkins' book, he talks about building alliances. And he says very much that. Pick out those few individuals in the organization that you're going to build an incredible relationship with, so that when you have questions, when there are things going wrong, when you need advice, you have people on your team that you have built a genuine relationship with.
Yep.
We try to also do that in our client engagements. Pick a few people that you can really build that genuine relationship with and get a deeper understanding of the client, their pain points. I mean, I think this just translates really well.
Completely. Yep. I can think of one client that we onboarded here in the last couple of years that one of the gals was going through a pretty rough time in her family. And we just had the opportunity to just lean in a little bit and show some care and concern for her. And man, I think not only did it bless and touch her, it was very meaningful to the people that were involved to say, hey, I'm part of a company that actually wants this to happen. And it isn't just about, I got to get this ticket closed and move on to the next person.
Yeah, absolutely. On a related note, the next point to discuss is it should be in all caps. Avoid drama.
Yeah, we all love drama.
Sometimes you can't avoid it.
Well,
you want to be in it.
It's so easy. And I see this when I actually start engaging with a new client all the time. The drama becomes evident right away.
Yeah.
And I think there's a temptation. So I think the worst possible version of the build alliances is pick a side of the drama to feed into. That's not what we're saying. We're saying the opposite. Drama, if you get involved early on, is super detrimental to those other potential relationships and your overall career. What's some guidance, Chad? Just some practical guidance. How can people avoid drama?
I think when you walk in, as much as we're talking about walking in and building up relationships in the business, you also need to be at arm's length a little bit as well, because you have no idea who these people are. And you may connect with somebody right away that is bad news. I've seen it. Quite frankly, I've been a part of it. And you have to take a step back and say, I need to hold everything at a bit of arm's length until I get a good lay of the land, till I know I can trust whoever it is in these relationships. So I think don't be skeptical, but be cautious.
Yeah. Good guidance there. Another point to talk about, to be successful in your first 90 days, I'm very passionate about this. Both of you have coached me on this. You got to be a team player.
Absolutely.
And being a team player, I think this is often kind of misconstrued. It's not being passive. It's being assertive and being team focused. You're focused on others, and you're being assertive, and you're being a good collaborator. What's some really practical guidance for those who maybe they don't feel like they are a good team player in the workplace, or they're starting a new job, new career? They want to ensure they check this box. What's some good guidance for them?
Well, I think it starts with what's the outcome or the objective of the team. A lot of our folks are either on a software team and they're delivering a certain software product, or they're on a team that, they're servicing certain clients and things like that. And so I think if you're new, it is just simply asking, how is our team successful?
Absolutely.
And what role do I have to play in that success?
Yeah, individual success is important.
Absolutely.
But it's not as important as contributing to your team success.
Yeah, and I think sometimes it's also, after you've had a little time in there, it's realizing that not everybody's having a great day. Mm-hmm. And so sometimes it's just taking notice and going, hey, you doing okay? Or, hey, is there something I can do to help you? Or, just reaching out. That's part of what can make a team very unique, is just that you've got people around that are willing to step up and support each other.
And they're aligned around the goal and objective. Absolutely.
Sure. The one thing that I think is really important to the conversation is having individuals in their first 90 days managing themselves in the process of starting into this business, right?
Very important.
Be self-aware. You're always going to strive to know more, but be disciplined in the process. But manage who you are and manage how the perception of you is coming across. Be always cognizant of what you're expressing out in the work environment.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Scott, you preach quite a bit on managing yourself, and you talk a little bit about time management and stress management and being healthy, and these are all really important elements.
Yeah, I think to the extent that you're balanced. I remember talking to certain employees that were kind of floundering at workplace, and I knew they have a lot more potential to give, and I come to find out that outside of work, man, they were taking on another job, or maybe they were just staying up ridiculous hours, and I'm like, You're not being fair to yourself here. You're not bringing yourself whole self into the job.
Yeah. These are some really good points. One of the points I wanted to bring up that is, again, it's one of our core values, is to always learn, improve, and be curious. I think to be successful in the first 90 days of your new job, you've got to be dedicated to continuous learning. And nothing, whether it's our clients or our own business, I haven't really come across very much as static. I mean, our business is very dynamic. Our clients are very dynamic. How can somebody implement continuous learning in their life and in their career?
From a workplace perspective, I think that it's really important to dive into what we do, right? Yep. And it depends on your position and what your role and scope of responsibility is. But from my perspective, walking into a new employer, it's my job to figure out how we do things, right? I want to learn about our business. I want to learn about how we work through processes from the bottom to the top. How do we get this done in this process? So I can understand, and from an HR perspective, I can sit and I can interview folks and I can give them an accurate perception of what we even do, right? Now that's isolated HR, but it's always important from an employer perspective to keep learning in the environment so you know who we are, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, Michael, I mean, it was honestly one of the things that drew me into this whole field of IT was it's about problem solving and learning what are the new tools and techniques out there to be able to resolve these problems. And so I think, for the person that doesn't want to learn, and that's obviously one of the things we're looking for in interviews is, what's something you've taught yourself recently or those kinds of things. But to the extent that you can see where we're at, the common pain points that clients or us internally are are having, and then begin to see what options are out there. That's what draws me into, wanting to learn new things.
Absolutely.
It's engaging.
Yes,
right?
exactly.
And when you get stagnant, there's nothing worse than that. You feel terrible about going in every single day. You're just doing the same thing over and over again. But when you're learning something, even if it has nothing to do with your job, right? If you're going back to school to learn something completely different, it just gives you an energy, and it rejuvenates you in the process.
Absolutely. Well, another point related to this one I want to discuss is, I didn't receive this advice till later in my career, but it's document and communicate your achievements. Starting a new job, hey, there's a couple processes that I think I can collaborate on and get improved right away. It's important to document those and to communicate those to your managers. I think, there's an extreme version of this where we're kind of bragging about how successful you are, or you're kind of rubbing people the wrong way because you want to change everything. But there's a good version of this, which is just a reminder to a busy staff, busy leadership. Hey, here's some of the value I was able to bring right off the bat. You made an investment in me, and here's just some of the value I was able to bring right away.
Yeah, I think, back to Chad's communicate. I think it's an easy one, and it doesn't have to be self-serving of promoting yourself. But when you've been given tasks and responsibilities, part of it is giving status back on them. Yeah. And so that simple email back to your manager or team lead or whatever of, hey, you assigned me this, here's the outcome. And just giving that kind of feedback. And the nice part is you go to, quarterly review, annual review, that they can look back through those and go, wow, this guy really accomplished a lot this year.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's a time and a place, right, to toot your own horn. And you brought it up, the review process is huge to help your managers to understand, hey, this is the value that I brought to the team. If you're just every day in their room and saying, hey, I just got this done or I just completed this, like they're going to be annoyed with that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so there's a time and a place, and you have to be tactful with that, but absolutely.
The last piece here, just to kind of put a bookend on this conversation, is, and we've talked about this a lot, but it's ask questions. There's a lot of folks, I think, that get thrown into a new job and they hit the ground running and they do the best they can, but they don't really pause to reflect and say, hey, where could I use some clarity? What hasn't been addressed yet? This is a really critical step. I mean, asking questions and digging a little bit deeper, highly recommended in the first 90 days. And I think these review process, the 30-day, 90-day reviews are great opportunities. Come prepared to that in the same way you would an interview. Come prepared with several questions. What are a couple other ways people can be sure they ask questions through their first 90 days?
Well, but to go back on that, it helps you to assimilate into the new environment, right? You're curious. You want to know what's going on in that business so that you know how to best help and support, right? And that's the positive side of asking questions. We've all seen negative sides, right?
Yeah.
Does this person truly know what the heck they're doing here because they're asking so many questions? We've gone over this 18 times.
Sure.
So be self-aware in that, but you're absolutely right. Asking questions just helps you to assimilate to your business.
What are your thoughts on this, Scott?
Yeah, I don't know how else you can learn and understand and align to, how that company's functioning without asking questions. I always like to ask at the beginning, like, hey, what's success going to look like for me in this first 60 days?
Yeah.
For, and get some of those and write those down. And then along the way, there are all kinds of clarity on, hey, the last time you guys ran into this issue, how did you go about solving this, so that I am now doing it the way that our company wants to do this.
Folks, thanks for joining us today. Hopefully this was a valuable podcast. This is a really important topic to me. I don't think that there's enough material out there to really help people get into their new job, into their new career. And hopefully this is valuable. And again, even if you've been on the same job for a long time, hopefully some of what we talked about today will help you hit the reset button if you're having any struggles or have run into some issues. Thank you again for joining us. Please don't forget to hit subscribe on YouTube and Spotify. We're also on Apple, and look forward to seeing you soon.